Chairete Pontes, welcome back to Greek. I'm very excited for today because we are going over something that is quintessential to the Greek language, and that is the middle voice. We'll also be doing the passive voice because in most cases they're going to look exactly the same. So we're going to start out looking at omega conjugation, middle and passive, present, imperfect, and future tense in the indicative, infinitive, and imperative. Although we're not going to be able to do a couple of those in the future passive, and I'll explain why later. And then we're just going to go over our vocab set, our 9th one. And the teaser for next week's lesson is going to be a sentence that contains a form of the verb Amy, and that might seem like a random verb to choose, just looks like any other, but actually it's a pretty special Greek verb, and I'll get into that in the teaser, and then, of course, there will be a whole lesson on it next week. So, first, how do you translate middle and passive voice? We'll start with passive because you already know that if you've taken Latin and if you speak English normally, you'll know that passive is when the subject is being acted upon. So, to be verbed instead of to verb. And middle voice is different because it's not that something's happening to you, you're doing it for yourself. So, it sounds a little bit weird now, but we'll get practice with it. So middle is translated as to verb for oneself. And then there will be a couple special verbs that are translated differently in the middle. Okay, let's just get into endings. There are lots of endings for today. That's the bulk of the lesson. So, present, middle, passive, indicative. The first ending that we need to learn is first person singular, and that's amai, omicron, mu, alpha, iota, amai, already looks way different than anything we've learned. Then a or a, just two different forms of the same one, but if you're going for the eta one, you need to make sure that you have that iota subscript that I apparently can't highlight right now. Oh my gosh, okay, there we go. That iota subscript so that we know that the iota is included there. And then third person singular is etai. And now on to the plural. We have ametha, esthe, and then ontai. I know these look really crazy, they're all new, but you'll at least be able to recognize them as soon as you see them. So, amai, a or a, etai, ametha, esthe, ontai. And lucky for you, now that we're going to do future, they will look exactly the same, except we're going to follow our same future rule that we learned earlier, where we'll add a sigma before the ending, or change the sigma however we need depending on the verb stem. We'll do an example in a bit. So, future. Sigma amai, so salmai, sigma a, or sigma a, so say, and then setai, sigma etai, and then sigma ametha, salmetha, sigma esthe, sesthe, and then sigma ontai, sontai. All right, so reviewing, salmai, say, setai, salmetha, sesthe, sontai. Like I said, pretty straightforward once you know the regular middle and passive endings. Now, here is what I was hinting at earlier, that notice I didn't include passive up here. It's not future, middle, or passive indicative. The future passive indicative and most future passive forms in general are formed from the sixth principal part, which we have not learned yet because we haven't gone over anything more than the first or second principal part. And for quick review, first principal part is just your present stem, not present stem, your first person singular present active indicative, and then second principal part, same thing but future. Remember that when we see the dictionary entries. Well, the future passive is based on the sixth principal part. So we are not even close to learning that. All you have to know is that you should not be translating any form that you see with an ending like this as future passive. That's just automatically going to be middle. Whereas up here with our present, middle, and passive, you know that it could be translated either way, and you can determine as you're translating what makes more sense, or there can be other clues in the sentence. Okay. Now, imperfect, middle passive, looks different again, just like imperfect active did from present active. So first person singular is main. It's a little bit of a weird new. Main. And then second person singular is u. Third person singular is eta. First person plural is ametha. Second person plural is este. And third person plural is anta. Now, if you remember, if you think back, we learned that the first and second person plural in the imperfect active looks the same as the present endings for present active. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So here, these endings we recognize because we just learned them, right? Just up here. Ametha, este. We already know those. And so now that we're in imperfect with ametha and este, we've already knocked out two endings because we'd already learned them. Which does mean you're going to have to do a little bit of harder work to figure out if they're imperfect or present. But remember that with all of our imperfect verbs that we see, there's going to be an epsilon or an augment in front of the verb or at the end of the preposition, the prefix before the verb, whatever it may be, you're going to see some form of epsilon or an augment, a temporal augment in your imperfect verb before these endings. So that's how you can distinguish. But other than these two endings, we have all new endings again. So let's just review all of them one more time before we move on. So first person singular, amen, then u, eta, ametha, este, anta. And now we are on to the present, middle, or passive infinitive. This is just one more ending to learn, nothing really too complicated about it. It's esthai. So epsilon, sigma, theta, alpha, iota, esthai. And for an example, let's use fulato. Fulato. So if we take fulato and we just take its present stem, so to do that, remember we're going to split it right here. And we're going to just look at what's before the ending. So fulat. Now to make it an infinitive, a present middle passive infinitive, we take fulat and then we add esthai. I didn't really save space here, so I'm going to write that again, but fulatesthai. And let's take a look at where our accent needs to be. So we're going to use our same accent rules as before. We put the accent on the last syllable, and because this is a proper diphthong, the I is a proper diphthong, then we're going to need to put that accent on the second vowel in the diphthong. which we've done. And now we're going to move it back, not 1, but 2 syllables, because I, when it's at the end of a verb, we learned this earlier, is short, a short ending. And with a short ending, we remember we bounce back 1, 2 syllables. So now we're at fulatestai. And there's your present middle passive infinitive for fulato. And now let's do future. You guessed it, all you've got to do is add a sigma before or change the verb as you need to, factoring in the sigma. So if you remember, fulato becomes fulaxo. So we don't just want fulaxo. We're going to need to add this ending now. But we've taken care of the sigma. So now we're at fulaxestai. And now we're going to use our same accenting rules. Second vowel of our proper diphthong, move back 2 spaces, 2 syllables, because the I is short at the end here, so 1, 2, and we get fulaxestai. Okay, and now we can move on to our present middle passive imperative. Oh, one last thing here. Same thing as with the indicative, this is just future middle, not future middle passive, because again, we're going to need that 6th principal part to form the future passive infinitive. We'll get there eventually. For now, let's look at the present middle passive imperative. So remember, there's not going to be a first person imperative. We just have second and third singular and plural. So starting with second person singular, we have u. And then third person singular, we have esto. Second person plural, este. And third person plural, eston. Just 4 more endings to learn. At this point, you're just taking them all in. All you gotta do is practice, and then before you know it, you'll have them memorized. And now, those are all of our endings for today. Let's take a look at some special middle translations. What I mean by this is that there are certain verbs that take on a special sense in the middle voice. So here, we start with alatomai, and we already know the word alato, which means to change. So based on what we've learned so far about middle voice, we would translate alatomai naturally as I change for myself. Remember, to verb for oneself is how we do middle. But although that can work, alatomai can mean in the middle, I take something or someone even in exchange for something or someone. And we have a couple more words like this. So for example, graphomai. Graphomai, we would think, is I write for myself. But actually, it can be translated as I indict someone. Paidelomai, we would think, is I teach for myself. But it can also mean I have someone taught. To have someone taught, if that makes sense. Sounds a little bit weird, but if you understand what I'm going for here. And then fulatomai could just mean I guard for myself, but it can also mean I am on guard against someone or something. These are just 4 specific translations you've got to learn, and they'll make a lot more sense in sentences if you translate them with these definitions, generally, rather than, for example, I write for myself. It would make more sense to say I indict someone. Especially if there's an object. What would you do? You gotta know these translations for that reason. Okay, so now let's do some practice. Our first practice is going to be back where we started with the present middle passive indicative. So let's start with pempo. Pempo, if we just form our first person singular present middle passive indicative, is going to be pemp, right? Because we take our stem and then we add our ending. So pemp. And then our first person singular middle passive ending is amai. We take our accent, put it on the final syllable, bounce back 2 spaces because the I diphthong is short. Now we get pempamai, and that's going to be our first form. Pempamai. And then second person is that A ending. I'm going to go with, actually, we'll write both. Pem, pay. This eta is long, so when we take our accent, we're just going to move it back 1 space, which is good because it's only 2 syllables anyways. And then pempe is our other option. Pempe. Again, this is long, we're only going to move it back 1 space. Pempe. They look pretty similar. And then third person singular is etai, so pemp, etai. This I is short, so we're going to move back 2 spaces. Pempetai. First person plural is that ametha ending. So we get pemp, ametha. This moves back 2 spaces. Ooh, not the whole thing. 1, 2, pempametha. And then second person plural is esthe, so we get pem, pesthe. That epsilon on the end is short, so we move back 2 spaces, 1, 2, pempesthe. And then third person plural, we get pem, pontai. Our ending is ontai. So we put our accent on that I. When I'm saying I'm not talking about the iota, I'm talking about the whole diphthong there, the alpha iota diphthong. So I is a short diphthong, we're going to move back 2 spaces, 2 syllables. So we get pempontai. And that's pempo in the present middle passive indicative. And now let's do future, which once we've learned these endings should be pretty simple. And I picked an easy word for this because I thought it would be nice to, for our first example, go a little bit easier. So paidewo is pretty simple in the future because there's no consonant there that we have to deal with before our ending. So we just add a sigma before our endings. So we get paideo, sigma, and then we just start just like we did with our present middle passive. So paideosomai. Put that accent on our I, move back 2 spaces, 1, 2, paideosomai. And now we can conjugate. Future middle indicative of paidewo. So beginning, paideosomai. Back, Man, this really isn't wanting to highlight the accents today. That's okay. Back, 1, 2. And we get paideosomai, the form we just made. Now, paideo, sigma, and then A, or A. so paidelse. Both of these are long endings, so whichever ending we're actually looking at, we're going to take our accent and just move it back one space. So paidelse. Third person singular is the paideosetai, etai ending. So paideo. It's not a good angle for me to be writing at. Paideosetai. That I diphthong is short. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're moving back 2 spaces. 1, 2. Paideosetai. And then first person plural, we have ametha ending, so we add a sigma before it and get paideo, sigma, ametha, paideosometha. Put that accent on the final alpha, move it back. Oh my gosh, I don't even know. Okay, you know what? We're just gonna do this the old way. 1, 2 spaces back, so we get paideosometha. Now we're gonna move on to second person plural, which is the esthe ending, so we get paideosesthe. Here we go, accent on the final. Oh, look at that, look at how nicely that highlighted. Okay, we're going back 2 syllables, so 1, 2. And remember, because this L is a proper diphthong, we're going to put the accent on the second vowel in the diphthong, which happens to be the upsilon. So we end up with paideosesthe. And then finally, in the third person plural, we have our ontai ending. So we just add a sigma before it and get paideo, sigma, ontai, paideosontai. Accent on the iota in the alpha iota diphthong, the I diphthong. And we're going to move it back 2 spaces, so 1, 2. Same thing with this L proper diphthong, so we put the accent on the upsilon, the second vowel in the diphthong, and we get paideosontai. And now we can move on to our imperfect middle passive indicative. This is where it gets fun. So for Speldo, first we're going to need to add our epsilon or temporal augment in front of our verb, and because Speldo, luckily, begins with a consonant, we don't have to worry about it. All we have to do is add our epsilon. So we get Speldo for now, don't worry. And then we're going to split Speldo where its stem ends, so espeld, take off that ending, and we're going to add our new imperfect endings. So our first person singular imperfect middle passive indicative ending is amen. And because now Speldo begins with a vowel, we need to make sure to put our breathing mark on, and this is espeldain. Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm saying. Espeldomain, not speldomain. So we're going to put a smooth breathing mark on here. And now we can remove this little division I put up for us to put on our new ending. We can add our accent to our final syllable on top of the vowel in our final syllable. That eta is long, so we're only going to move back 1 space and we get espeldomain. Espeldomain. I don't know why it's so hard for me to speak today, but hopefully you can still follow along. Okay, let's get into conjugating. First person singular is what we just wrote, so epsilon, spelled, and then our ending, amen. Smooth breathing, accent Eta is long, move back one syllable, Speldamen. Second person singular, we put our epsilon in front, put our spelled, and then we add our ending, oo. Smooth breathing, accent on the second vowel in our proper diphthong oo. And because this is a proper diphthong oo, we're going to know that it's long and move back our accent only one syllable. So we end up with Speldo. I like that. I like that form. It looks nice to me. Okay, third person singular. We're going to add an epsilon in the front. And then spelled. And then our ending, eta, epsilon, tau, omicron. Smooth breathing. And now we add our accent to the final syllable. That omicron is short, we know, so we're going to move back 2 spaces if we can, and we can. So we get a speldata. And this is an L proper diphthong, so we put our accent on the second vowel in the diphthong. I'm sorry if some of this is repetitive to you, but I can promise you that the more you hear it, the more it's going to stick in your brain, and that's what we want. So, first person plural. We start with epsilon and then spelled. And then first person plural is the ametha ending, same as the present middle passive ending. Smooth breathing. Put our accent on the final syllable. And now that alpha is short, so we move back 2 syllables. 1, 2. Espeldametha. And then second person plural, we put our epsilon, spelled. And then our ending, este. Smooth breathing, accent on the final syllable, move back 2 spaces because the epsilon is short. Espeldaste. Both second person and forms, are very cool to me. I'm not really sure why they look so cool right now, but I think they do. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Okay, third person plural, epsilon, and then spelled. And then our ending, anta. Smooth breathing. Put our accent on the final syllable. Grab the accent if I can. That omicron is short, so we're going to move back 2 spaces onto the second vowel of this proper L diphthong. And we get espeldonta. Okay. And now we're going to do present middle passive imperative. Starting with second person singular, we have klept, and then we're gonna, if it's not clear, I'm taking off that omega ending to get our stem, so we get klept, and then add second person singular, present middle passive imperative ending oo, and we're going to stick our accent on the final syllable there, grab the accent, move it back 1 syllable, so we get kleptu. Then in the third person singular, we take klept again. And we add our ending, estho, epsilon, sigma, theta, omega. Add our accent onto our omega on the end, move back 1 space, 1 syllable. And we get kleptestho. Second person plural, we take klept again, klept, and we add our ending, este. Put our accent on the final syllable, grab it, move it back 2 spaces, 2 syllables, because that final epsilon is short, And then finally, our third person plural present middle passive imperative, we take klept and we add esthone. Add our accent on the final syllable, grab it, move back one syllable because that omega right here is long. So we get kleptesthone. Now, looking at this, you might think, why do these endings seem so familiar? Our second person endings. And that's because you recognize them from up here. So, your imperfect middle passive indicative looks the same in the second person singular and second person plural, with the exception of your epsilon out in front / temporal augment out in front, because you have that oo ending in the second person singular and the esthe ending in the second person plural. And you recognize that here. And what's even cooler, a whole another layer, make this smaller. This esthe ending goes back even further because, as we learned, these two endings in the imperfect match with our future middle endings and our present middle endings. So really this esthe ending that we recognize in the imperative is not just because we recognized it from the imperfect that we just did here, the imperfect here, but we also recognized it from the future middle and from the present middle passive as well. So there are several overlaps in endings here, and that is where it can get confusing, but if you just practice your tables and you practice with application and sentences and in the worksheet below in the description, then I promise it will not be super confusing. All right, and now we're on to vocab. Not too many verbs, not just verbs, words to learn this week. And then we have a really short teaser. Okay, so starting with verbs, our first one is peso in the future. And this verb takes an accusative and then an infinitive, and it means to persuade. So persuade someone in the accusative to something. Persuade to. And that to is taken care of by the infinitive form. And then in the middle, which is why I have highlighted this as I have, this verb, peso, takes the dative and means to obey. So something pretty different from persuade, but all you have to know is that if you see peso in the middle, with any middle endings, then you're going to follow it with a dative object and translate it as obey. Our next verb is trepso in the future. And this means to turn, and in the middle, to move. Then meno means to remain or await, and takes the accusative if you're translating as await. If you're translating as remain, it's intransitive, so you're not going to have an object there. But if you're awaiting someone, then that someone's going to be in the accusative. And now on to nouns. Amaxa, which we'll see in the teaser in a little bit. Amaxa, amaxes, hay means a cart or wagon. Limne, limnes, hay, means pond or lake. This to me looks a lot like the Latin word limen, but it does not mean the same thing. There is a similar looking Greek word that means the same thing as the Latin limen, but limne is not that word. Limne means pond or lake. And now topos, ha, means a place, like a physical place, or a topic, like a topic in a book, in a story, a passage in a story, anything like that. And then oikia, oikias, he, means house or household. And you'll also very commonly see this as oikos, uha, which also means house or household, but can also mean family. And now on to our adjectives. Makros and mikros you probably have seen before. Makros, on, means long, tall, or large. And mikros, on, means small, little, or short. So they're antonyms. And then dunatos, on, means able. And hekastos, on, means each. Now for our adverbs, we have poro, oh my gosh, I really don't know why I can't speak today, I'm sorry. Paro, which means far off, paro. And then, paro, if it's used as a preposition, takes the genitive case and means far from or far away from. And then our final preposition, this one is used everywhere. We have hupa, or if followed by a word that begins with a vowel or a word that begins with an H sound, you'll see hoop or hoof. And hupa can take the genitive, in which case it'll mean from under or by. In the dative, it can mean under. And in the accusative, it means under or to a place under. And now this makes sense if we think about how we translate our different cases in Greek, or how they can be used is a better way of putting it. So for example, genitive can be used for a lot of what ablative was used for in Latin. Same thing with dative. So genitive is where we get our place from which or our agent. So that's why we see from under, place from which, and by, agent. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said you may get a hint that something is in the passive or should be translated as passive rather than middle, just based on what else is in the sentence. So for example, if you see hupa in a sentence with what could be a middle or passive verb, and it makes sense to translate hupa as by, so something is done by someone, then you're going to know that the verb is passive, most likely. And now moving on to our dative. Like I said, dative also took on, I say this as if it happened after the fact, it's actually the opposite, but dative has some similarities to the ablative case in Latin, and that dative can be used for place where in Greek, which is why in the dative hupa means under. And then with the accusative, hupa can mean under also, but it can mean also to a place under, which makes sense because accusative, just like in Latin, is used for place to which. So you're going to a place under. So I just love this preposition because it shows a lot about how the cases can be used to change the sense or totally change the meaning of a word in Greek. And now let's move to our teaser for next week. The sentence is going to look surprisingly short given the teasers that we've been doing the last couple weeks that have been longer, hard sentences. And this is not a trick. It's just going to be totally different looking than anything you've seen before. So let's start by looking at what we already know. We recognize he, we recognize hekaste and amaxa. These are words we just learned this week. Now we know hekaste is an adjective that means each, and amaxa we just learned is a noun that means cart or wagon. So we can make this its own thing. This is just our subject with an adjective modifying it, and we can figure out that amoxa is the subject because this he is nominative, the amoxa is nominative, that's the alpha ending is a nominative ending, this eta ending is a nominative ending, so all the clues are there. And now, here's the interesting thing. The other word we should recognize is makra, because we just learned this adjective. And we also know that that alpha ending is a nominative ending, unless these were all neuter plural accusative. But we know that amoxa is feminine and singular when it has that a ending, and we also know that he is feminine and singular. So, how is this possible? Well, we have this mystery word in the middle, esti, that we haven't learned before. And that's because esti is a form of the verb eimi in Greek, eimi technically, and eimi is like sum in Latin. It means to be, not normally translated like that, but for example, I was, she is, you were, that kind of thing. And so it takes a predicate nominative, just like in Latin. So just like sum in Latin, eimi and its forms are going to look pretty different than the forms we've already learned for verbs before, but that'll just make it stick out and you'll be like, oh, yeah, I know that. It's a form of eimi. And so we'll be going over all those forms next week. That's going to be the focus of next week's lesson. And for now, all you need to know is that esti here, what we see, is the third person singular. Third person singular, present active form, indicative form of esti, or of eimi. So esti is the third person singular, present active indicative of eimi. And when I say eimi, this is what the verb looks like. Eimi. So totally different looking than anything we've dealt with, but just some more forms to learn. Not anything too crazy or difficult. So let's try translating this. He hekaste amoxa is each cart or wagon. Esti we know is like sum. If this had been est, we would know that it's is, right? So esti, which looks very similar to est in Latin, also means is. So each wagon is makra. Makra is big, large, long, anything like that. So each wagon is long. A bit of a funky sentence, but I wanted to use words that we just learned and get you excited about what this mystery is in the middle. And we'll explore all of that next week. Should be a fun video. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I know it's a lot of endings, but if you just practice with the worksheet below, practice going through the video again, it will all make sense. I have full faith in you, and I will see you next week.